Hello, my darlings, and welcome to another bedtime story. Tonight we're going to be taking a look at another of Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales, The Elf of the Rose. So, you know what to do. Cuddle up, get cozy, and I hope that you enjoy. In the midst of a garden grew a rose tree in full blossom, and in the prettiest of all the roses lived an elf. He was such a wee little thing that no human eye could see him. Behind each leaf of the rose he had a sleeping chamber. He was as well formed and as beautiful as any little child could be, and he had wings that reached from his shoulders down to his feet. Oh, what sweet fragrance there was in his chambers, and how clean and beautiful the walls, for those were the blushing leaves of a rose. During the whole day he enjoyed himself in the warm sunshine, flew from flower to flower, and danced on the wings of the butterflies. Then he took it into his head to measure exactly how many steps it would take him to go through the roads and crossroads that are on the leaf of a linden tree. What we call the veins on a leaf he took for roads, and very long roads they were for him, for before he had half finished his task the sun went down. He had commenced his work too late. It became very cold, the dew fell, and the wind blew, so he thought the best thing he could do would be to return home. He hurried himself as much as he could, but he found the roses all closed up, and he could not get in. Not a single rose stood open. The poor little elf was very much frightened. He had never been out at night, but he had always slumbered secretly behind the warm rose leaves. Oh, this would certainly be his death, he knew. At the other end of the garden he knew there was an arbor overgrown with beautiful honeysuckles. The blossoms looked like large painted horns, and he thought to himself he would go and sleep in one of these till morning. He flew thither, but hush, two people were in the arbor, a handsome young man and a beautiful lady. They sat side by side and wished that they might never be obliged to part. They loved each other much more than even the best child could love its parents. "But we must part," said the young man. "Your brother does not like our engagement, and therefore he sends me so far away on business, over the mountains and seas. Farewell, my sweet bride, for you are so to me." Then they kissed each other, and the girl wept and gave him a rose, but before she did, she pressed upon it a kiss so fervently that the flower opened. Then the little elf flew in and leaned his head on the delicate, fragrant walls. Here he could plainly hear them say, "Farewell," and he felt that the rose had been placed upon the young man's chest. Oh, how his heart did beat! The little elf could not go to sleep, it thumped so loudly. The young man took out the flower as he walked through the dark wood alone, and kissed it so often and so violently that the little elf was almost crushed. He could feel through the leaf how hot the lips of the young man were, and the rose had opened as if from the heat of the noonday sun. There came another man who looked gloomy and wicked. He was the wicked brother of the beautiful maiden. He drew out a sharp knife, and while the other was kissing the rose, the wicked man stabbed him to death. Then he cut off his head and buried it with the body in the soft earth under a linden tree. "Now he is gone, and will soon be forgotten," thought the wicked brother. "He will never come back again." He was going on a long journey over the mountains and seas. It is easy for a man to lose his life on such a journey. My sister will suppose he is dead, for he cannot come back, and she will not dare to question me about him. Then he scattered the dry leaves over the light earth with his foot, and went home through the darkness. But he went not alone, as he thought. The little elf accompanied him. He sat in a dry, rolled-up linden leaf which had fallen from the tree onto the wicked man's head as he was digging the grave. His hat was on his head now, which made it very dark, and the little elf shuddered with fright and indignation at the wicked deed. It was the dawn of the morning before the wicked man reached his home. He took off his hat and went into his sister's room. There lay the beautiful, blooming girl, dreaming of he whom she loved so, and who was now, she supposed, traveling far away over mountain and sea. Her wicked brother stopped over her and laughed hideously, as only fiends can. The dry leaf fell out of his hair upon the counter, but he did not notice it, and went to get a little sleep during the early morning hours. But the elf slipped out of the withered leaf, placed himself by the ear of the sleeping girl, and told her, as if in a dream, of the horrid murder, described the place where her brother had slain her lover and buried his body, and told her of the linden tree in full blossom that stood close by. "That you may not think this is only a dream I have told you," he said, "you will find on your bed a withered leaf." Then she awoke and found it there. Oh, what bitter tears she shed, and she could not open her heart to anyone for relief. The window stood open the whole day, and the little elf could have easily reached the roses or any of the flowers, but he could not find it in his heart to leave one so afflicted. In the window stood a bush bearing monthly roses. He seated himself in one of the flowers and gazed on the poor girl. Her brother often came into the room, and would be quite cheerful in spite of his base conduct, so she dare not say a word to him of her heart's grief. As soon as night came on, she slipped out of the house and went into the wood to the spot where the linden tree stood, and after removing the leaves from the earth, she turned it up, and there found he who had been murdered. Oh, how she wept and prayed that she might also die. Gladly would she have taken the body home with her, but that was impossible, so she took up the poor head with the closed eyes, kissed the cold lips, and shook the mold out of his beautiful hair. "I will keep this," said she, and as soon as she had covered the body again with the earth and leaves, she took the head and a little sprig of jasmine that bloomed in the wood near the spot where he was buried, and carried them home with her. As soon as she was in her room, she took the largest flower pot she could find, and in this she placed the head of the dead man, covered it up with earth, and planted the twig of jasmine in it. "Farewell, farewell," whispered the little elf. He could not any longer endure to witness all this agony of grief. He therefore flew away to his own rose in the garden, but the rose was faded. Only a few dry leaves still clung to the green hedge behind it. "Alas, how soon all that is good and beautiful passes away," sighed the elf. After a while he found another rose which became his home, for among its delicate fragrant leaves he could dwell in safety. Every morning he flew to the window of the poor girl, and always found her weeping by the flower-pot. The bitter tears fell upon the jasmine twig, and each day, as she became paler and paler, the sprig appeared to go greener and fresher. One shoot after another sprouted forth, and little white buds blossomed, which the poor girl fondly kissed. But her wicked brother scolded her and asked if she was going mad. He could not imagine why she was weeping over a flower-pot, and it annoyed him. He did not know whose closed eyes were there, nor what red lips were fading beneath the earth. And one day she sat and leaned her head against the flower-pot, and the little elf of the rose found her asleep. Then he seated himself by her ear, talked to her of the evening back in the arbor, and of the sweet perfume of the rose and the loves of the elves. Sweetly she dreamed, and while she dreamt, her life passed away calmly and gently, and her spirit was with he whom she loved, in heaven. And the jasmine opened its large white bells, and spread forth its sweet fragrance. It had no other way of showing its grief for the dead. But the wicked brother considered the beautiful blooming plant as his property, left to him by his sister, and he placed it in his sleeping room close by his bed, for it was very lovely in appearance, and the fragrance was sweet and delightful. The little elf of the rose followed it, and flew from flower to flower, telling each little spirit that dwelt within the story of the murdered young man whose head now formed the part of the earth beneath them, and of the wicked brother and the poor sister. "We know it," said each little spirit in the flowers. "We know it, for we have sprung from the eyes and lips of the murdered one. We know it, we know it." And the little flowers nodded with their heads in a peculiar manner. The elf of the rose could not understand how they could rest so quietly in the matter, so he flew to the bees who were gathering honey and told them of the wicked brother. And the bees told it to their queen, who commanded that next morning they should go and kill the murderer. But during the night, the first after the sister's death, while the brother was sleeping in his bed, close to where he had placed the fragrant jasmine, every flower cup opened, and invisibly the little spirits stole out armed with poisonous spears. They placed themselves by the ear of the sleeper, told him dreadful dreams, and then flew across his lips and pricked his tongue with their poisoned spears. "Now we have revenged the dead," they said, and flew back into the little white bells of the jasmine flowers. When the morning came, and as soon as the window was opened, the rose elf with the queen bee and the whole swarm of bees rushed in to kill him, but he was already dead. People were standing round the bed and saying that the scent of the jasmine had killed him. Then the elf of the rose understood the revenge of the flowers and explained to the queen bee, and she with the whole swarm buzzed about the flower pot. The bees could not be driven away. Then a man took it upon himself to remove it, and one of the bees stung him in the hand so that he let the flower pot fall and it was broken to pieces. Then everyone saw the whitened skull, and they knew the dead man in the bed was a murderer. And the queen bee hummed in the air and sang of the revenge of the flowers and of the elf of the rose, and said that behind the smallest leaf dwells one who can discover evil deeds and punish them also. Something of a sad little story, but it is one that I'm fond of, and I hope now so are you. But either way, I do hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that you get some good rest. Good night.